You say you want a different life. Not in a dramatic way, not as a fantasy you tell strangers, more like a quiet fact you carry around. The kind of sentence that lives in the background while you do everything else. You want more space, more direction, more freedom, more honesty. And then the day passes, and nothing in the structure of your life actually makes room for what you say you want. It's easy to treat that as laziness, or confusion, or lack of discipline, but that explanation is too clean, because you aren't confused about everything. You can be very competent, very sharp, very aware. You can describe your own patterns with uncomfortable accuracy, and still resist the life you claim you want. So the question isn't whether you understand yourself, it's what you're protecting by staying the same, and why the life you want feels like a threat when it gets too close. Resistance rarely looks like resistance. It doesn't arrive as a clear no. It arrives as postponement, as reasonable doubt, as waiting for the right time, as improving the plan, as learning more, as needing a little more clarity before you begin. And these things sound mature. They sound responsible. They sound like care, but over time they create a shape where your desire stays intact and your life stays unchanged. That's the strange part. You can sincerely want something and still build a system that ensures it never happens. Not because you're lying, because you're divided, because one part of you wants the future and another part of you has sworn loyalty to the person you've already been. And loyalty can be stronger than desire, even when loyalty is destroying you, especially when it's destroying you in a way you can tolerate. What kind of life have you learned to tolerate without calling it a loss? People talk about fear of failure, but that's not always the fear. Sometimes the fear is success, not because success is bad, because it changes what you can no longer say about yourself. It changes your excuses. It changes your identity. It changes your story. There's a strange safety in wanting. Wanting keeps your self-image alive. Wanting lets you imagine the better version of you. Wanting lets you stay connected to potential. But stepping into the life you want forces a kind of death, not physical, identity. You lose the familiar version of you that has been surviving this whole time, the version that knows how to operate inside limitation, the version that knows what pain to expect, the version that understands its place. A new life isn't just new behavior, it's a new position in the world, and a new position makes you visible in a different way. It changes what people can demand from you. It changes what you can demand from yourself. It changes what you can no longer blame. So part of you holds back, not because it hates you, because it believes it's protecting you from exposure, from responsibility, from the humiliation of being fully seen in your own life. What would you have to stop being if you actually became who you claim you want to be? Your current life might not be the life you want, but it's the life that knows you. It's familiar. Because an unhappy self that is familiar can still feel safer than a fulfilled self that is unfamiliar. There's a psychological pull towards self-verification, a desire to keep confirming what you already believe about yourself. If you believe you're not the type of person who follows through, you will notice every moment you fail to follow through. If you believe you're always behind, you will create situations that keep you behind. Not consciously, but consistently. Because consistency feels like truth, and truth feels like safety. So when you imagine the life you want, your identity doesn't just see opportunity, it sees contradiction. It sees a version of you that doesn't match the current narrative, and the mind resists contradictions that threaten the entire structure. It prefers to adjust the dream instead, make it smaller, make it later, make it conditional, so you can keep believing in it without having to become it. Have you ever noticed how your dream life stays just far enough away to preserve your current identity? Sometimes you will even start. You'll feel something open, momentum, energy, a brief period where the future feels possible, and then something happens. Not dramatic, just subtle. A missed day, a small mistake, a wave of fatigue, a feeling of being exposed, and suddenly the whole thing collapses. Not because you couldn't continue, because continuing would require tolerating a new kind of discomfort, the discomfort of inconsistency, the discomfort of being a beginner again, the discomfort of not being able to hide behind your old identity. When you're stuck, you at least know who you are. When you start changing, you enter a period where you don't know who you are yet. You're between identities, not who you were, not yet who you want to be. That space is psychologically unstable. It produces anxiety, it produces self-doubt, it produces the urge to retreat back to the old self, not because the old self is better, but because it's known. And the nervous system prioritizes known patterns over meaningful futures. So you retreat, and then you call it a break, or being realistic, or focusing on what matters. But underneath, something else happened. You touched the edge of a new identity, and the old one panicked. How many times have you mistaken identity panic for rational decision-making? There's also a more private fear, not failure, not judgment, a fear that if you get what you want, you will still feel empty, and that emptiness will have nowhere to hide. Right now, dissatisfaction can be explained. It has targets, it has reasons. But if you improve your life and still feel unsettled, you lose the external excuse. You lose the ability to say, "Of course I feel this way, look at my life." So the mind hesitates, because the mind would rather keep a solvable problem than face an unsolvable question. A solvable problem feels controllable. A deeper question feels like existential exposure. What if the life you want doesn't fix the feeling you've been running from? What if the feeling is older than circumstance? What if it's tied to something you've never allowed yourself to name? Then the dream becomes dangerous, not because it won't happen, because it might happen and reveal that the real conflict was never about your situation, it was about you, about what you're avoiding inside yourself, about what you don't want to meet in silence. So you delay. You keep the dream alive as an idea, a promise, a future, but you don't bring it close enough to test it, because testing it might strip away the last comforting explanation. If the dissatisfaction remained after change, what would you be forced to confront? There's a moment many people recognize, a quiet moment, when they realize their resistance isn't an accident, it's a system that has been working to keep them emotionally safe, working to keep them socially acceptable, working to keep them within the limits of their family roles, their old agreements, their inherited identities. And when you see it like that, resistance looks less like sabotage and more like an internal security detail. It scans for threats. It flags anything that might destabilize your place in the world. It's not interested in your happiness. It's interested in continuity, in predictability, in maintaining the version of you that knows how to survive, the version of you that learned early what was rewarded and what was punished, the version of you that learned how to be small enough to keep peace. So when you say you want a different life, the security system runs a check. Will this cost you closeness? Will this cost you approval? Will this invite conflict? Will this expose you? Will this require you to be more honest than your environment tolerates? And if the answer is yes, resistance activates, not loudly, quietly, through delay, through doubt, through later. So the real question isn't, why am I resisting? It's, what threat is my mind detecting in the life I say I want? And what does it believe will happen if I step into it? Your resistance may not be about the life you want. It may be about the person you would have to become to hold it. Because the life you want is not neutral. It changes your relationships. It changes your daily posture. It changes your self-respect. And self-respect can create distance. It can make you less available for certain dynamics, less willing to participate in old patterns, less tolerant of being misunderstood. And that shift has consequences. Some people will respond to your change as abandonment. Some will respond as betrayal. Some will respond by reminding you of who you used to be. Not because they're evil, because your change destabilizes their understanding of you. It disrupts the role you played in their emotional economy. You might be the one who overfunctions, the one who absorbs, the one who stays quiet, the one who never asks for too much, the one who stays at the edge. A new life might require you to stop doing that. And if you stop, the entire system around you has to adjust. Sometimes it won't. And endings are honest. They don't negotiate. So your resistance might simply be grief avoidance. Avoiding the grief of losing familiar roles. Avoiding the grief of seeing who only loved you when you were predictable. Avoiding the grief of becoming too different to be treated the same. If your change would force certain endings, which ones are you quietly refusing to look at? You might think you want freedom, but freedom is not just open space. Freedom is exposure. It means you can't hide behind structure. You can't hide behind obligations you didn't choose. You can't hide behind chaos. You can't hide behind crisis. If you finally have the life you want, you have fewer places to put your blame and fewer places to put your pain, which means you have to carry it more directly. That sounds empowering in theory. In practice, it can feel terrifying, because many people learn to survive by outsourcing their internal experience to external conditions. If the conditions are bad, the feelings make sense. If the conditions improve, the feelings become suspicious. So the mind keeps conditions imperfect, not because it enjoys suffering, but because suffering provides context, it provides explanation, it provides a reason to stay numb, a reason to stay distracted, a reason to delay intimacy with yourself. Sometimes the life you want threatens to remove the very conditions you've been using to justify your distance from your own inner life. And then what? Then you'd be alone with yourself, without the noise, without the excuse, without the story that your life is the reason you don't feel whole. Are you resisting the life you want, or are you resisting the silence it would create? There's another uncomfortable layer. Sometimes you don't actually want the life you say you want. Not fully. Sometimes you want the identity of wanting it. You want the feeling of being someone who aspires. You want the moral cleanliness of having a higher self, but you don't want the cost. Not because you're shallow, because you're honest. Because wanting and choosing are different psychological acts. Wanting is safe. Choosing is confrontational. Choosing collapses your options. Choosing invites consequences. Choosing forces you to live inside one reality instead of many fantasies. So you stay in wanting, you stay in possibility, you stay in analysis, and you call it patience. But over time, it starts to feel like a quiet betrayal, because you can feel your own avoidance. You can feel the part of you that keeps moving the finish line. And that awareness creates a new discomfort, not the discomfort of your circumstances, but the discomfort of realizing you are cooperating with your own limitation. And now the mirror is closer. Now you can't fully blame the world. You can't fully blame your past. You can't fully blame other people, because you can see the mechanism. You can see the moment you turn away, the moment you choose familiar pain over unfamiliar risk. And the question changes. It becomes more intimate, more humiliating, more real. If you stripped away the identity of someone who wants more, what would be left of you right now? People often believe resistance disappears when the desire becomes strong enough. But desire is not always the deciding force. Sometimes the strongest force is fear of disintegration. The fear that if you change, you won't know who you are. You won't know how to behave. You won't know what you deserve. You won't know what you're allowed to ask for. And that identity uncertainty can feel like falling. So you keep the old self intact, even if it's cramped, even if it's painful, because it's coherent, it's a known container, and containers matter more than people admit. A person will often choose a familiar container over an expansive unknown, even if the unknown is what they claim to want. So you stay and you wait for clarity. But clarity is not what comes first. Something else comes first. A confrontation, a fracture, a loss, a moment where the old identity becomes too expensive to maintain. Until then, resistance can keep winning. Not because you're weak, because the old self is organized. It has rules, it has reflexes, it has a whole history behind it. The life you want is a future. The life you have is a system, and systems tend to beat futures. Unless something breaks, unless something changes the internal math, unless you stop pretending this is about motivation and start seeing it as an identity conflict you've been living inside for years. So the ending isn't clean. It can't be, because your question was never simple. Why do I resist the life I say I want? It might be because the life you say you want is not just a life, it's an identity funeral. It's the end of certain roles, it's the loss of certain protections, it's the removal of certain excuses, it's the exposure of certain truths you've survived by not fully admitting. And maybe that's why awareness alone doesn't change anything, because awareness can describe the conflict, but it doesn't choose a side. It just watches you stand at the door, hand on the handle, feeling the weight of what's on the other side. Not just opportunity, but consequence. Not just freedom, but exposure. Not just a better life, but a different you. And if you're honest, the question might not be whether you want that life. The question might be whether you're willing to lose the version of yourself that has made it this far. And what happens if you never are?